Hi, welcome to our Best Practices webinar series with Advocates Protecting Children. I'm Maria Keffler. We're here today for an interview with a detransitioner. We're talking with Chris, that's her pseudonym. She was a trans-identified young woman who identified as a man when she was younger, and she's here to talk to us today about her experiences. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can email them to advocatesprotectingchildren@gmail.com. Or if you're watching this as a video later on, you can use that address to email us any questions that you have, or you can visit our website at www.advocatesprotectingchildren.org. So Chris, welcome. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, my name is Chris. I am 22 years old and I identified as trans for 5 or so years and have been trying to navigate my life with gender dysphoria since I was as young as 6. I'm adopted, and for about one third of my childhood was filled with abuse and trauma by multiple different individuals. Um, had multiple partners of the same sex throughout high school, and as well on my way to possibly medically transitioning, as well as getting engaged to my partner at the time when my journey to where I am today started. This journey started a year and a half ago, probably 2 years now since I was 20 and now I'm 22. Um, and was trying to learn how to be a quote unquote good man. And ironically, through my journey of discovering masculinity, I ended up being able to slowly appreciate and embrace my femininity as well as my feminine attributes. I was still deeply entrenched in my faith and struggled with the question of how can I be a Catholic and trans? And is it even possible to be both? But the main question I had settled on and still continue to ask to this day is what does it mean to be a Catholic? And how do I be an apostle for the kingdom of God and not an apostate? My quest to seek truth to my answers was no small task, and multiple times I almost left the Catholic Church and Christianity altogether. But with many mentors, celebrities, and in person, one on one mentors and friends being patient and answering my questions, I was able to start finding peace and security with myself. Um, and so I, uh, uh, I wouldn't say I necessarily grew out of these delusions or habits, but experienced what St. Paul said when I was a when I was a child, I thought like a child, and when I became a man, I thought like a man. I matured, understood, and accepted the truth instead of bargaining or running away, and every day I still fight to understand and be with God.
Thanks. Thank you for giving us sort of that summary of your background. Tell me a little bit about your experience dealing with gender ideology. How did it start? How did this kind of become a thing in your life?
Um, from a fairly young age, like all children who I feel like did not have a sexual abuse background, because sexuality isn't activated until later on in life. You don't feel sexual attraction. And so whenever I heard these labels from the internet, like terms like asexuality, I heard those things and I was like, "Oh, that's me." And it's pretty much in the early 2000s. I feel like a lot of it was the self-diagnosing culture that we still are experiencing today in many different online circles. And so I heard some of these. uh, conversations that I've never heard of and thought to myself, "Hey, that's me," or "Hey, that's a similar experience that I'm experiencing. I don't have sexual attraction." And, you know, for someone in middle school, where I would hope you don't have a determined sexuality by that age range, you don't necessarily need to be questioning that because it's normal, I would say.
Yeah, my daughter, when she was in middle school, she was talking about a friend of hers, and she said, "Oh yeah, Brittany is bisexual." And I mean, we're talking about 11-year-olds here, and I'm a teacher, and this like concern rose up in me, and I'm like, "Is Brittany having sex with someone?" And my daughter said, "Oh, no, no, no. She just likes both boys and girls." And I said, "That's not sexuality.
Yeah.
She is not sexual anything."
Mhm.
And that is something that's really bothered me, and I'm glad you brought that up, that there's so much in our culture talking about sexuality. And as you said, sexuality starts to wake up around the time of puberty. And earlier than that, it's unconscionable to be talking to kids about their sexuality at all.
Mhm.
Did you have anything else you wanted to add about how you got pulled into it, or can I ask you another question?
Um, yeah, I mean, just reiterating, I mean, you don't develop a sexuality until older, so I mean, um, yeah, that's just the, I guess, culture I grew up in was the self-diagnosing culture in which there's a, I guess, a level of cognitive dissonance at that age where you're like thinking sexuality is the same thing as who you like, who you're attracted to, and that's a, in the science world, actually a different thing that is separate of sexuality. So just
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point. Well, how were your relationships when you were young? Did you feel like social difficulties figured into some of your gender struggles as well?
I didn't really have too many friends growing up. My friends were in books, um, and movies, and I was enthralled as a young child of the adventure genres. I think many people of my age demographic love adventure. Some people really like fantasy, but it speaks in the heart of humanity that there's good and evil and the fight and conquest of evil. And so we all like to believe we're good, but as you get older, the nuances of stories become more complicated. But, you know, and many of the people when I was growing up were particularly male heroes of mine, and I never saw them as that is someone I want to marry someday. I saw them as I would like to be that person because they're really cool, or they get to do cool things, or they get to, you know, like uh, adventure and triumph and win. And so I think to at least a lot of people who either in their teens or early young adults like me right now would say, well, that's how I found out I was a masked lesbian because didn't see Prince Charming as the end goal. I wanted to be Prince Charming kind of mentality. And I would say I'm no different in that description, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I can see that. Um, Perhaps for girls who are more what we would have used to call tomboys, who like the adventure, who like, the climbing trees and the going on, exciting adventures. I can see how that would be very confusing if we as a society are telling kids, oh, to be a girl, you have to be girly, girly princess, wear frilly clothes and fall in love with Prince Charming. And if you don't do that, well, then you must not really be a girl. That's really confusing for kids, and I can see how that would kind of mess up your sense of self. And you mentioned adoption in your introduction. Did that figure into your gender story as well?
Growing up, I wouldn't have been able to consciously be like, it affects me. Um, but as I've kind of been doing more research over the years and more self-reflection and studying, um, abandonment issues, the fear of being weak, and all those different things are riddled throughout my story, and it astonishes me the more I talk to people, but also reflect on my own story as well, is what people will do, like the crazy things people will do to feel safe. Um, and so, I did not want to be perceived as weak. So the opposite of my understanding at a young age of weakness was to be masculine or strong or be kind of the prince charming that, I could never find, but I could emulate. Um
Well, there aren't a lot of strong female heroes, heroines, really, are there? I think
with
today we're seeing more of them represented in media, but there's still way fewer strong female characters than strong male characters.
I would say so. Um and I think Wonder Woman, the DC Marvel character, would be a good example. Um and so I feel as though the irony of the transgender movement, as not sexist as they would like to think they are, keep reinstating gender stereotypes in order to be validated in your masculinity or in your femininity in which you wish to claim.
Oh, absolutely. I think you're right. I think the gender ideologues are pushing the stereotypes so hard. I mean, have you seen that poster that says, "Which gender are you?" And supposedly it's on a continuum, but at one end they've got Barbie and at the other end they've got G.I. Joe. I'm like, how more stereotypical could you possibly get than that?
And I feel like for those in the audience who identify or feeling wise at least ascribe to gender fluidity, it's kind of like, well, I kind of feel like I can be anything and I don't have to be constrained into a box. And even people who I notice on the internet who are fully medically transitioned and yet they still feel this unspoken pressure of I have to act a certain way or else then I'm no longer valid.
Mm, that brings up a
Oh,
good point. I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
oh, I was just finishing off saying, like, even post transition, the idea of trying to fit into a specific narrative is will always be the journey and never fully satisfied with you.
Yeah, that I was going to mention that it is really sad that so many people feel like they do have to fit into other people's boxes. And, that probably is in part where gender ideology has come from, is people not wanting others to tell them you have to dress a certain way, you have to act a certain way. And that's sad to me that anyone feels like that. We all should feel free to like the things we like, prefer the things we prefer, behave as, boldly or as timidly as we want to without being categorized as feminine or masculine because of it.
Mhm.
And it seems like that's something that you think you still kind of struggle with, being put into somebody else's box.
I think nobody, especially if you either grew up with either seeing it firsthand or hearing stories like I didn't necessarily was exposed to those things, but I heard stories of you know trampling of the human will and saying you have to be this or you have to be a housewife or whatever. Um I think the myth is that there should be dread around traditional roles, because it is imprison or it's confining, and that is what the people in the 50s, 60s, and 70s fought, so we don't have to live in the quote unquote dark ages anymore. Those are more complex stuff. High schoolers aren't really talking or going in the in-depth history of the civil rights movements and all that stuff. But all of that stuff stems from history to our modern day issues of questioning and wondering what does it mean to be human. And as someone who took a social justice course, all of the questions on human sexuality, gender identity, racial identity, and so on and so forth are all stemmed from the classical known question of what does it mean to be human. And that is what the journey of, I feel like, the trans movement and the LGBTQ plus movement in general is trying to answer. But the problem is they throw so many complications into their language that it kind of clouts what the original intent is. And also, how can I be loved?
Mm.
How can I be safe? I mean, um, and you know, there's a lot of anxiety and fear within the community. And, as kind of a detransitioner who I occasionally decide to hop on the internet and look at the other side from the new lens I have of the culture, I just see a lot of sadness and anxiety riddled young adults and later older teens trying to figure things out, and not too many true, genuine resources for them to be able to talk about this. Or if I disagree, then I'm going to be attacked. Like the LGBTQ plus community, in a way, has become its own political party. And some people are like, hey, I just want to like who I want to like, or identify who I want to identify, but I disagree with XYZ. Well, you can't. And so
Yeah,
some I'm noticing it, especially the millennial demographic, starting to not identify with the community anymore because of how much it's changed over literally the past decade.
that's interesting. Yeah, there are so many aspects of this that are very cult-like, and I think that unwillingness to allow people to disagree within the community is one of the major cult facets of this. Because if you allow people to disagree, then there's going to be dialogue opened up. And as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in this ideology, holding two opposing viewpoints at the same time and never saying, "Oh, yeah, those disagree. I can't agree with both of those." And it is heartbreaking because that age demographic, teenagers and young adults, that is the time in life where you're searching for identity. Who am I? Who am I going to be? And then after that time period, when you're in your early 20s, mid 20s, maybe into your 30s, you're seeking intimacy. Am I going to get married? Am I going to have a life partner? And this ideology has really hijacked both of those life crises in ways that are very unhealthy. Do you agree?
I 100% agree. Um, I remember, at the time when I was like in the early stages of dating girls, and I remember hearing statistics saying something like, I think 70% of lesbian relationships uh have some form of domestic abuse or emotional abuse or neglect or whatever type in those relationships. I'm gonna have to cite my resources, obviously. I'll have to fact check myself, but it was an astronomical high statistic that raised awareness in me. It was like, oh, that's weird. And I think it's because the reason that is when if you have a more outgoing or extroverted, but also trauma also, when not addressed, hurt people.
Mhm.
So you're still growing up and might have a good upbringing, you might have a bad upbringing, maybe somewhere in the middle. And when you're trying to relate, to talk, to date, to be in relationship with people within this age demographic, everything gets thrown in together. Emotions get like harder to manage. And especially if you have a partner that, stonewalls, you might be the venter and they might stonewall. And then there's that emotional need that is neglected. And that can, especially with women, female with female relationships, I feel like that gets exacerbated even more than it is with like men. Now there are still problems with men, but I cannot at least with clarity and authority speak on those issues. But at least for female on female dynamic type relationships, it just can get really volatile or emotionally manipulative quickly because of enmeshment or one feels like they have to prop up the other one emotionally, but I can barely survive with my own emotions.
Oh, that's interesting. And men and women are so incredibly different. My cousin said she couldn't wait to get to heaven to ask God, why did you make men and women so different and then expect us to live together in harmony? But I think there is an aspect of our differences make us stronger when we come together as a couple. The things that make me, or that maybe I need support with, my male husband is going to have, and likewise, the things that he struggles with, maybe I'm more capable in those areas. But let me ask, you mentioned that you were adopted, and I'm curious about the family that you grew up with. Did you, in the family that were adopted into, what were gender roles like in there? Was it a pretty traditional household, or were there things that you saw that you said, I don't want to do it this way, or I absolutely do want to do it this way?
So I am going to put on the cap of my perception growing up and not how I am now, because I have a much better relationship, I would like to think, with my family now, but it definitely wasn't always that way.
Well, that's okay. You can talk about it both then and now, however you want to address it.
Okay. Well, for starters, I grew up with the mindset of traditional values. My mom used to tell me, dad is the head of the household, but pragmatically speaking, I saw the roles in reverse where my mom was the breadwinner. She went out, she worked after my dad got laid off, and so you would think I would have more of a feminist heart where women are capable of doing things. Women can do things because my mom was outside of the home worrying about her career and how to provide for the family we have. But I didn't really see it as that way because I don't think anyone really pointed that out to me growing up until like I was in middle school, and by that age I was like, yeah, 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 whatever. But I grew up with the traditions and I guess what you could say the patriarchy, but I didn't see that per se in my household, but that was taught. Um and so that to me, um I just didn't understand, well, why does dad have to be the head of the household? Or why does men have to lead? Or why does XYZ fill in the blank thing? Type of conversations. And I just wasn't really satisfied with some of the responses I got in return. And, I was a big Bible nerd as a kid, and loved the stories of the Bible and was enthralled by, again, the heart of adventure. But, I met passages like wives be submissive to your husbands, etc., etc. And I just, I, my first introduction to, I guess, the horrors of the reality that many people face in the world was on the news of a little girl not too far from where I lived at the time was raped. And that was on the news. And I was like about maybe 4 or 5 or 6, somewhere in that age range. And, you know, hearing that um, kind of put fear in my heart, realizing that I can be overpowered, that I am not invincible, or I need to figure out a way to be stronger so that doesn't happen to me. And so, I mean, that was the mentality I had, and I don't think that's something my parents exactly recognized growing up, although they remember hearing me saying things like I don't want to be weak, um and my mom is on this, so I mean, I don't know if she'd be comfortable, but she could definitely say I was very much of a tomboy, very stubborn growing up. And I'd say my stubbornness has been a double edged sword over the years and can be very maddening and frustrating as a parent. But she and my father would do many things differently. Um, Now,
If they could go back, you mean? If they could go back knowing what they know now?
back knowing what they know now, they would
Mhm.
have handled things differently.
I think that's being a parent myself, I can say I think most of us think that, wow, I wish I could go back and redo this, but we do our best that we can as we're learning.
Yes. Um, and I feel like there will always be elements of regret with my childhood and how they responded to me being in a relationship with girls, or difficulties with schools, or me not socially getting along or appropriately with other people. um Not saying I was a bad kid, but I just was severely awkward, and that just tend to make people uncomfortable growing up. um and so I I think, like, there's no guidebook on parenting, but as now a young adult, um, or an adult child now, um, I can at least point out areas that might help your audience, um, in some areas. And I think the number one thing that I've been meditating and praying on this week, is when you are caught in shame, because there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of discomfort around talking about sexuality, or the idea of non heteronormative relationships with parents. And I think there's a lot of fear of, because we've heard, if you're on the internet or a chronic online person like myself, how I was, you would have heard stories like your parents are going to kick you out if they find out. And that places and convinces your audience, who is already insecure about love, feel like love is conditional even between a parent and a child. And if you talk with your parents objectively and openly, you will find out in many cases parents do not have this level of you need to do XYZ in order to earn my love. And I think as a mom, you would agree. I know my mom would agree, but
Yeah, I think that's another reason that we call this a cult is because one of the things that cults do is separate the recruits from the people who care most about them. And in
Mhm,
this case, it's the parents. And so they're telling lies about parents. Are
mhm,
there bad parents? Sure. Are there parents who cut their kids off for being gay or trans? Yes, but I would say those are not in the majority. Most parents love their children deeply and will do whatever they can to protect them and keep them safe. But that lie, oh, if you tell your parents, talk to them about this, they're gonna abuse you. That's another cult tactic for getting children's loyalty away from the people who would take care and protect them the best.
mhm. And it's one thing if the targeted audience were older teens or young adults. Even still, it's a manipulative tactic, but it's even more damaging, I'd say, the younger you share that message with. Because, I remember, I think one of the earliest horror stories in that regards was the Alex Cooper case. Um, in which she was kicked out of her parents' home because she was a lesbian in Utah and all that stuff. You can look that up on your own time. I'm not going to tell you all the stories, but things like that. The reinforced fear of if you're gay, someone's going to hate crime you. If you're
Mm.
trans, your family friends will not accept you for who you are, and that is their fault, not yours. And that's just the aggressive marketing or propaganda that just is. And some people would say, well, it's not propaganda, it's the truth. I've experienced this or my friends experienced this. So obviously, it's not all propaganda if it's based off truth. And that is, I think, a really deceitful thing that Satan uses is lies that are based in any amount of truths, small or big as it might be. Uh, it is still can be used to harm, damage, and even ruin generations through just lies and manipulations.
Yeah, well, that's one of Satan's best strategies. He is the father of lies, and he only needs to put about 5% of an untruth in something that's otherwise true to really cause a lot of damage. And I would say you're right. That is just those kinds of lies are just seeded all the way through this ideology. And we've talked to so many kids and young adults who've been through this who have talked about how, I actually had a pretty good childhood, but during the time that I was trans identified, I really believed that I'd had this terrible childhood because of the way the trans rights activists talked about my childhood.
Hmm.
Oh, your parents, wouldn't take you on this vacation. Oh, they just didn't care about you at all, did they? And kind of reframing and rewriting history in really nefarious ways.
Yeah, and uh, to touch up on the topic of because there's a lot of shame or anxiety or worry around not being in the what the trans or LGBTQ plus teen or young adult's mind is you should approach it with patience, because when there's shame, you really shouldn't be criticizing or yelling at your children. Number one, I understand there's this fear of I might lose my child. I need to aggressively protect. I need to shield. I need to do all these things. But um, and I wrote in one of my notes is be tough for your kids, but not with your kids, and don't try to make the truth palatable, but make it intelligible for them to understand. Because I think knowledge is the doorway to sometimes accepting things in your heart. Not always the case, but patience and trust in God, especially if you are a Christian or Catholic. I think the things that lead us away from salvation, or the things that might lead to our damnation, can be the very thing that could salvage us, can save us, and sanctify our hearts.
It's interesting because I was going to ask you both what helped to pull you out of this ideology and what advice did you have for others. So I'm glad you kind of segued into that. I just wanted to mention that, as you said, this is such a desperate thing for parents. When you see your child going down this really unhealthy pathway, it's almost like the trans ideology, for parents who recognize that gender ideology is not true, it is a lie, it's almost like watching your child play with a shotgun and the child doesn't know like where the trigger is or what's going to happen if they point that shotgun at themselves. And
Mhm.
parents feel like, I need to get this dealt with right now. I need to get that shotgun away from this child. This is the desperate feeling that I have. But you're right. We have to, as parents, be calm when we're watching our kids deal with something like this and address it peacefully, logically, patiently, because in another different analogy, it's kind of like they're deer in the headlights, or we can't spook them. We've got to draw them back to truth and reality and help them recognize that their parents really do love them. They're not upset about this because they don't love the child. They're upset about this because of how much they love their child.
Mhm. And from I can speak as a teen not that long ago, that aggressive, we need to protect you from this, or even using things like you've been brainwashed. Comments like that were not very helpful for me, because again, teens, I think, are masterful internalizers,
Mm.
and I sometimes adults sometimes forget that how much we internalize and don't externally or verbally communicate our feelings and emotions in the most healthy or appropriate ways. But my internalized thought whenever I would deal with um harsh criticism or what I perceived as angry parents, although my parents were just scared to death and loved me. Um, I just perceived that as, you don't think I'm smart, or you don't think I recognize, signs of propaganda. I mean, like, I would say as a fairly um like as educated as I could be as a 16-year-old. Obviously, I know I don't know everything, and I think only with age will you find out you don't know everything. Um, but I only knew only so much at the time, and I was like, so I bought a book that is currently in my room, on how propaganda works, and I was trying to show my parents I do understand how propaganda works, and it isn't, it's just these people share a life experience that I haven't like heard of talked about either in anywhere, and it just makes sense to me. So in the war of ideas, that the only way to fight bad ideas or lies is with better ideas and with truth. um
So
and
is that what happened for you? Like, how did you start to say, "Oh, you know what? I've been mistaken about this,"
Mhm.
and move out of it? What worked for you?
So my thing that I wanted to do was like, okay, well, I have self-identified as male, and and I wanted to figure out, what does it mean to be a man, and how could I be a good one, how could I be a noble one, how can I treat women with respect, how can I do all these things, and all of those things are just, in my opinion, basic human decency that everyone should strive to do. But my understanding was I wanted to learn how to be chivalrous and kind of be like the knight in shining armor. And so I looked up. I don't exactly know how I found these individuals, but I ended up looking up the topics of masculinity, and that is where I found YouTube channels like the Warrior Poet Society. I found Pastor Mark Driscoll over in Scottsdale, Arizona. And like all of the questions of what does it mean to be a man were all found in Christian settings.
Mhm.
And
Interesting. That's really interesting. Hmm.
yes, and so as I watched, and I still don't remember the video. It's probably somewhere in my saved playlists because I remember it shook something in me because it masculinity was so daring and awesome and wonderful, and internally I knew in my heart I love that and I could never be that. And it was an attractive thing. Truth, virtues, living out those things, like kind of like um your core tenets and building up a moral character. It's hard not to be attracted to those kinds of things, to the nobility of wanting to live honorably. And so that was, I'd say, for sure the gateway for me, and through that I was slowly able to become more tolerant of different ideas, or where my parents and I would agree to disagree. I was willing to, listen to my parents if they wanted me to sit down and watch the documentary of Matt Walsh,
Mm.
What is a Woman? I didn't really care for it at the time, but there were things that were brought up, and I think when things are spoken about within a community by people in the community or who have personal experience, I think is also really effective. Because people are like, I think there's so much division, and because we look at people through the eyes of labels, we automatically dismiss, oh, you're a straight person, I don't understand you. Well, I mean, there are certain things that are universal human things, like heartache. That is a universal thing. Pain, rejection, loneliness, and I think you can find many great wisdom from different people. You just need to put aside your own personal prejudice in
Mm.
order to seek out and learn truth, but also humbly do it. And
Oh, yeah, that's important. And going back to what parents can do is coming to your child with love and not that I'm going to tell you the way it is and you're going to listen to me, but more humble, like, tell me about your experience. I want to understand this more. And getting your child talking, and as kids talk, those inconsistencies, the places of illogic, will start to come out. And when you're having a conversation, I think that's a more palatable way to start processing those things than if you're just being told,
Mhm.
do this, do that, do the other thing. Well, this has been really illuminating. Is there anything else that you think people should know before we wrap up today? What would you tell people who are maybe going through gender confusion or families who are trying to help those who are?
Mhm. I have like 5 bullet points that, if, you know, the conversation might be enlightening, might be a little overwhelming all at once. Here are just 5 bullet points that I've come up with that I think would really help your audience.
Mhm.
Is number one, be not afraid. Like, do not be afraid to have those conversations. And, true love casts out all fear. So if you truly love your children, you would be able to have the uncomfortable conversation, whether that's or even cousins, nephews, nieces could also fall under that category. And so number one, be not afraid. Number two, be tough for your kids, but not with your kids. Number three, planting seeds. Um, if Satan has sown in seeds of doubt or questions or fears or anxieties about themselves or about the dynamic and relationship with you, work on the relationship, I feel like, before you talk to them about the actual issue at hand. Um, so planting seeds as well, in reverse to counteract the bad seeds and allow them to freely accept and reject and also be patient with that exchange. Number 5, truth without kindness is cruelty. So the reason why I say that is it's the facts don't care about your feelings mentality. And sometimes you'll, especially feelings, when we feel upset or distressed or stonewall, we won't want to listen to the facts. And so your feelings might not care about your facts. So that is why I say truth without kindness almost feels like cruelty, for the person on the receiving end. Um, and that your sexuality and your gender is a gift from God. It is not gross and it should not be an idol.
Mm.
Uh,
Thank you.
so yeah, those are my bullet points that I.
Thank you. That's a great way to end. It leaves us with some powerful things to think about. Thank you for sharing with us today. I know this is going to be really helpful to a lot of people and families, and I know it's hard sometimes to talk about these difficult things we've been through, but we really appreciate you being willing to talk to us today. So God bless you. Thank you so much, and this will be available on YouTube, so please share it far and wide.